Good evening, folks. I will now call this meeting to order on a standing committee on accountability and oversight. And I want to welcome any of our viewers who are joining in. And just to start off the introductions, my name is Steve Norn. I am the MLA for Tuneda and chair of this committee. And normally on our agenda, we have a prayer to start off with, but seeing as we did the prayer earlier today and in session, I think we could forego that. So going back to the agenda here, number 2 item here is the review and adoption of the agenda. Mr. Clerk, do you speak to that item? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You have one item on your agenda, which is the presentation and briefing, and then following that, there will be an in-camera wrap-up for AOC members.
Okay. Mr. Clerk. So I don't think we have any changes. I don't hear any. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Emily Johnson. Emily Johnson has moved the adoption of the agenda. The motion is in order. And all those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. And the next item here is back to the agenda on conflict of interest. Are there any conflict of interest? I don't hear any. I will do that as and when. Just bear with me. I'm just going to make a quick note. And just a reminder for everybody, today's meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels, and presentation materials will be available on the Legislative Assembly's website after the meeting has concluded. To respect physical distancing requirements, all the witnesses will be attending by video conference. And I'd like to remind all members and our witnesses that all comments, questions, and remarks will need to be directed to myself as the chair. And in addition, both members and the witnesses will need to wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking. And so with that, we'll go back to introductions. So I'll ask the members to introduce themselves in the room to start, and we'll start to my left, starting with Emily Johnson.
Alan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Katrina Knockleby, MLA for Great Slave.
Masicho, and we'll go online. We could start with Emily Cleveland.
Caitlin Cleveland, MLA Cam Lake.
Masicho.
Jackson Lafferty, MLA Murphy.
Okay, Masicho, Emily O'Reilly.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Masicho, MLA Jacobson. Okay. We're good? Okay. Okay, thank you, members. I'll ask the Honorable Premier to introduce herself, other witnesses, and to proceed with any opening remarks. And with that, the line is yours, Madam Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, committee members. Thank you for providing the opportunity for discussion about the plans for operations of the 2021 Tibbitt to Contwoyto Winter Road and the plans put in place by the joint venture in response to the COVID-19 pandemic to ensure the safety of both workers and NWT residents. With me, video, is Mr. Mike Lowy, the Director of the Winter Road Operations, and I believe Michael Conrad, the MD, Deputy Medical Director, Tibbitt to Contwoyto Winter Road Joint Ventura. From the COVID-19 Coordinating Secretariat, I have Associate Deputy Minister, Mr. Russ Nordoff, and Dennis Marchirio, probably didn't say that right, sorry, Director of Compliance and Enforcement Operations with the Secretariat. They're both present with me today. We all know the importance of the Tibbitt to Contwoyto Winter Road to the economy of our territory. The road is critical to the resupply of mines located to the north of Yellowknife. It also provides access to mineral exploration projects and to abandoned contaminated mine sites for federal remediation projects. The joint venture is responsible for operating the Winter Road, and they've taken significant steps to address the risks associated with construction and operation of the road during the pandemic. With the approval of the chair, I'd like to propose that Mr. Lowing share his presentation with the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll turn it back to you.
Merci, Madam Premier. And with that, Mr. Lowing, you could proceed with your presentation. Mr. Lowing, just check your mic. I believe you're muted. Mr. Lowing, are you on the line? And I'll just pause for a brief moment, just to see if we can sort out any sort of technical difficulties that we have. Just bear with me. Thank you.
Mr. Lowing, can you check your audio settings on? you can't see, but he'll throw to you.
Sorry, I just missed that last part, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We figured out our technical difficulties, and we now have Mr. Mike Loing on the line with us. Good evening, Mr. Loing.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah. So we're just where we left off here. We're at the juncture in the meeting where you can give your presentation. So with that, I'll turn the line over to you to start with your presentation. Mr. Joe.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Loing. I'm the director for the Winter Road operations for the Tibbitt to Contwoyto Winter Road joint venture, and I'd first like to wish everybody a happy Ice Road Day in the NWT. Today is the day that we've opened up our ice road. I would like to note that also on the line, and I'm hoping the audio is working a lot better for him than it is for me, is Dr. Michael Conrad, who is our Deputy Medical Director, who comes from the sunny parts of BC. I'll let Dr. Conrad introduce himself.
Good evening, Mr. Norn and other committee members on the Standing Committee of Accountability and Oversight. It's a pleasure to meet with you here this evening.
Folks, we have about a 15-minute presentation, so pitter-patter, we'll get at it right here. So let's see, we're on slide number 2, and which is our health and safety share, and then the Tibbitt to Contwoyto Winter Road joint venture, we always start every meeting, regardless of the size, with a health and safety share. And I would like to show you something that you probably may or may not be aware of. And it's been a challenging year for us, and we'll talk a bit about that beyond just COVID. Earlier in December, when we started construction, and we always start the southern section, about mid-December, we had a piece of equipment break through in a small slough located south of Wade Lake, I'd say about 80 to 75 kilometers up the Winter Road. And in this situation, an operator went from what we call profiled and safe ice onto unsafe ice while he was multitasking, trying to get that extra little bit of ice cleared. And as you can see, his piece of equipment broke through. And something we all know about northern lakes, this was more of a northern slough, and the unit went down in about 26 inches of water. Well, as you can see there, it's down more than 26 inches, and when that piece of equipment touched the very soft bottom of the loon muck, it sank. And but it was like a slow motion sinking, and the operator was to get out. And of course, we finished our investigation, and following procedures is always very important in any workplace, and ensuring that you monitor your people to follow procedures is just as critical. However, we found in this situation that the noise of COVID was a factor in the incident, and that the crew had been distracted by COVID. All the changes, everything we've done to them to make them safer creates barriers. And in this situation, the operator even admitted that he was distracted, and this event did occur. So as leaders, we focus on the controls that we have, and when we have new risks, making sure that it doesn't drown out the things that we have that are existing to us. We'll move to slide 3. The quick overview of the road on slide 3, and the Winter Road is essentially operated, it's a joint venture that's operated by the 3 diamond mines in the Northwest Territories. We have the De Beers Canada Gahcho mine site. We have the Rio Tinto Diavik diamond mine site located due north. And beside it, we have the new, that's the old Acadie mine site, but it's being operated now by the new owner of Arctic Canadian Diamond Mining Company Limited. Those 3 companies make up the joint venture who I work for, and they build and fund and cover off a road that spans over 400 kilometers from Yellowknife to the furthest mine site, which is Acadie. 85% is built on the lakes of the road, with 55 portages making up the remainder, but 15% that cover 42 kilometers of the road. We have 3 camps that operate to support, that essentially do the construction and operations. In the north section at the Lac de Gras camp, we have the Nuna de Toncho Winter Road Services, a joint venture. And in the southern section for the Lockhart camp, which is midpoint, and the Dome camp, which is the first one, we have DTR First Nations Construction Corp. At its peak, we'll have about 160 people working in the camps with 160 people working on the project with 95% based in the camps, and that doesn't include the drivers. All right, we'll go to the next slide, number 4, please. We're this year expecting almost 600 drivers to be coming up to to join us on the road. It's estimated that 90 to 95% of the drivers that will come up on the winter road will stay in what we call the NWT bubble, with an average cycle time of about 2.3 days. It's what it takes the drivers to get from Yellowknife up to a mine site and back. Going south doesn't serve what they want to do, which is to make money. And the average driver will do between 20 to 25 trips over the ice road season. Full construction started of the camps, as I mentioned. Some construction started in the middle of December, but you can see that on December 27th, all three of our camps went into full staffing and full construction, with an opening today, February 8th. And we'll go to the next slide. This year's Winter Road, as you can see, gives a breakdown, and this information is generally just, we keep it to the joint venture, but gives you an idea of the number of loads that are going up the road and the historical perspective. And you can see here that the largest loads is going up the Diavik Diamond Mines, followed by De Beers Gotchaquay Mine, and the new, the Ekati Mine is the smallest amount. Overall, loads are down for this season, 1,000 loads from last year. And if you were to look at the 5-year average, historically the loads are decreasing from about 2018 to 2013. The average load was about 8,300 per year, so you can see quite a dramatic shift. We'll proceed to slide number 6. And this is just to give you a quick overview of the Winter Road and the organizational structure. And it's not just a bunch of guys running up and down the road with graders. As you can see, we have a medical director, we have a large health and safety component, we have the northern section operations and the southern section, which I described. We have our Winter Road operations group, which are the security personnel, a complete dispatch services, and an entire engineering and environmental team to support the activities that span 3.5 months. We'll go to slide number 7. Here you can see, folks, we have what's our biggest threat this year? Well, we have a number of challenges on the road, and this year ice has been very, very challenging for us. And right now, so is the weather. We've opened up our first day, and within 2.5 hours had to close the road because of a large storm way up in the McKay Lake area, about 300 kilometers up. But our biggest challenge this year, as it is for everyone in the Northwest Territories, has been COVID-19. And, of course, we worry about all the truck drivers coming in, but we also worry about our Winter Road camps, where we combine both southern and northern workforces, much in the same way that our joint venture partners do at their mine sites. And you can see here that we worry about the chance of transmitting COVID back into the communities, and we know that it's a reality for the government. Across Canada, the numbers you see there, it's an old slide, we're now currently down to about 39,000 active cases. So there is a downward trend, but it doesn't eliminate the risk for us on the Winter Road. And now we're going to go to the next slide, which is our COVID-19 management. As you can see here, we love our flow charts on the Winter Road, but as you can see, the biggest challenge for us is developing a plan that meets the requirements of the CPHO and of the WSCC. So we work very closely with all the entities to ensure that in all situations we have met, and in most situations exceeded the requirements set up by the CPHO. And I'll begin to, in this presentation, we'll now get into the key components of what those major control points are for managing COVID. And Glenn, if we could move to slide number 9, please. First off, I think most importantly, is the Winter Road has adopted a medical model. It's not just Mike Lowing or this ice road building and operations team making decisions around COVID. We have Dr. Nick Withers, and actually I have to give some acknowledgement here, and Dr. Conrad, who is with us. Dr. Conrad, as I mentioned before, is the deputy medical director for us. So Dr. Conrad and Dr. Withers will act as our medical liaison. They provide clear and ultimate medical direction for us on managing COVID. They also continually talk to and liaise with Dr. Candola and Dr. Andy Delapizzi. Both Dr. Conrad and Dr. Withers are very involved in the COVID management programs for Rio Tinto and for the Ekati Diamond Mine, and are also very involved in the Trans Mountain Pipeline as the main medical provider. So they have extensive experience in remote and northern operations. perhaps Dr. Conrad, you could talk a bit about the services that your company was providing for us.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Dr. Conrad?
Thank you, Mr. Norn. Yes, as outlined, we've provided to industry, industrial clients, COVID screening and management services since early into 2020. We want to ensure that the workforce heading to any given site is as reasonably clear of transmitting or having COVID as one can possibly be. It's a tricky virus and it manages to do its own thing, but to the extent that is possible, we've taken measures to prevent that. So we do telephone screening of workers before they come in. We do airport screening. We do PCR testing on arrival to sites, such as at the Divik mine. And to date, we've conducted thousands of telephone screening and thousands of PCR tests. And I think the testament to that work is the extremely low positivity rate that we have compared to the positivity rate of testing of the general population. And so I think those measures are very important in keeping the virus at bay from these sites, and we've gained a lot of experience in doing that over the last number of months. So I think we're in a good position to provide those similar services to the Winter Road. And I think the other point I just want to make at this time in the presentation is that all of our work is in close concert and in essentially lockstep, I'd say, with the CPHO, so that the work we do are in alignment with their efforts as well. And we try to make sure that everything is done in accordance with the Government of the Northwest Territories requirements. Back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Dr. Conrad. Mr. Lloyd?
Thank you, Mr. Norn, and thank you, Dr. Conrad. We'll move to the next slide, with slide 10, please, which is the pre-travel medical clearances, and Dr. Conrad already spoke to it, and we are following the same models that have been used very successfully with the joint venture partners and the remote mine sites. And we screen through Dr. Withers and Dr. Conrad all of the employees coming from the south. And we do screening, of course, here in Yellowknife, and we'll talk a bit about the screening for the northerners. But the priority that we focus on is on the southerners, as you can see here. And the biggest point is people are screened before they come to the Northwest Territories, and if they don't pass the screening process, they are not allowed to go up. We don't allow them to travel up. We don't allow them to go up the Winter Road. And again, we're checking for signs and symptoms of COVID, but also compliance to the government as requirements for remote workers, so that in terms of the enhanced physical distancing that they're required to do prior to coming to the Northwest Territories. If we could move to slide number 11. And this is the COVID testing component that Dr. Conrad alluded to. We have engaged in and have begun testing all personnel that go up the Winter Road. Even for myself, if I'm going to go up and visit any one of our operations, I require a COVID test, even though I'm only there for a short period of time. All personnel are going up. They're being tested prior to going to the camp and must have a negative test prior to actually either driving by road or traveling into the camps. We also do exit testing. So at the end of a person's rotation, whether it's 2 or 4 weeks, they are tested and confirmed to be COVID-free, COVID negative, before leaving any of the operating camps or facilities that we have on the Winter Road. We are currently reviewing, and we'll probably be looking very strongly at implementing a testing cycle at day 7. So in reality, those folks working on the Winter Road will be tested 3 times. Right now, we're just assessing how the private provider can accommodate this increased volume. And we are working with a northern company and all the tests essentially, and with actually one of our joint venture partners that uses their lab at the northern part to ensure the testing is done. I'll actually at this point get Dr. Conrad to offer some perspective on the scope of the testing that we are doing. Mr. Norn.
Thank you, Mr. Loing. Dr. Conrad.
Yes, so it's mentioned already, the PCR testing is done on all the individuals before they come up to camp, and they would require a negative test. Then on departure as well. And then, of course, if they become symptomatic while they're at camp, further testing is conducted. And this is a PCR test, so there's two different types of tests involved in COVID testing, generally an antigen or a PCR. This is the PCR testing. If we do have a symptomatic person, we would also test them at site and take that down to Stanton for the certified lab that is at that facility. But we can, for example, at Divik right now, we're upwards of 10,000 PCR tests completed with only 5 positive cases. So as I was saying earlier, with the measures in place, we can't escape it entirely, but we have demonstrated a very extremely low positivity rate and have been able to manage things successfully to date.
Thank you, Dr. Conrad. Mr. Loing.
Thank you, Mr. Norn. We'll move to the next slide, and I'll pick up the pace a little bit, folks, because I know it's late in the day for you. If you want to slide 12, which is our camp management, and for those of you who've been in the Northwest Territories for a long time, that the challenges we face, our camps are much smaller than the larger diamond mines that exist due north of us. And in this journey, we've worked with the CPHO on ensuring that our accommodations, often they're shared accommodations, that we don't expose to people to increase any exposure potential. And for all 3 of our camps, we have deployed additional accommodations units to bring our camps into operation and to meet CPHO requirements. The challenge, of course, is when you're moving sleeping accommodations up winter ice roads, you need a certain amount of ice, and unfortunately, the ice is not cooperating. So it's in 2 of our 3 camps, we've been able to get those units into place, but still working on the 3rd one, which always remains a fairly substantial challenge. We'll move to slide number 13. And this is talks about our winter road construction. And one of the ways we looked hand on heart to manage COVID is, of course, you reduce the duration of the road. One of the larger influxes, of course, comes from our drivers, with an estimated 600 coming into the Northwest Territories. So we've shortened the season to, again, help reduce the exposure. Traditionally, the winter ice road operates on an 8-week cycle season, and in this case, we've actually dropped it to 7. So most of you familiar with the road would have seen it open on February 1. It's actually opened on the 8th. We've also changed our crew rotations to meet government requirements based on the 2-week rotations. And because we also started the road earlier to increase and to prepare for any potential COVID delays, we actually equipped all of our light vehicle fleet in the southern section to clear the ice roads with pickup trucks. Now, traditionally, we've always used heavy snow clearing equipment. And this year, for those of you familiar with Gordon Lake, both the express lane and the northbound or the main haul lane were cleared using pickup trucks, a first of its type. And it's interesting how COVID has forced us to try different strategies and things out of the box, and quite successfully. And it's a good thing we do, because ice was very challenging. We'll move to the next slide, which is, I think, of a lot of interest to folks, and is the management of the drivers. The most public side of the winter road is what people see is in Yellowknife in the North Slave region on Highway 3 and 4 are the trucks. And again, with over almost 6,100 trips being planned up and down the winter road, we'll get into the nitty gritty of how we're going to manage the drivers. So the drivers will be screened, and like, for example, this morning, every driver that came into our dispatch facility located in Engle Park came in, was received by a medical technician, with a questionnaire, and we went through COVID signs and symptoms, and they had their temperature checked, and they were screened medically to ensure that they were fit for work and COVID-free. And then the individuals were then taken to another station where another technician administered the COVID test, as Dr. Conrad pointed out, the Pcr testing, and where we can verify that they are COVID-free. Our Winter Road drivers will be tested on day 1 and day 7, and only if they become symptomatic or contact tracing after that. Now, it's important to note that most of these, again, as I mentioned, most of these drivers will stay in the territorial bubble. And if we need to do testing, we can. But as a general rule, they become just like every other Northerner when they spend the next 7 weeks with us. There are a very small select group of drivers that will continue to do what we call transborder movements. And these are mostly specialized loads. For example, specialized lubricants that need to come right from the refinery where they can't be stored in Yellowknife. The bulk of our fuel, our concrete, a lot of the basic commodities that we haul up the road are actually already pre-staged here and have been brought up over the last 4 to 5 months. But the bulk lubes are an example of stuff that the drivers need to go right from the refineries in Edmonton all the way up to a mine site. The other commodity is ammonium nitrate, or what we call prill. This is the bulk explosive that we use in our northern mining operations. Of course, people have asked, well, why don't you do bulk storage of the ammonium nitrate in the North of the Territories? And we need to be very careful that we don't introduce larger risks than transborder drivers. But for those folks that are driving the border every time they cross and come back, they have to restart that COVID testing cycle. So if you stay in the bubble, it's day 1, day 7. If you go outside that bubble, we will begin daily, or basically every trip, testing on you. We're also giving our drivers infrared thermometers and daily monitoring cards so that they check themselves every 24 hours for symptoms. And if it's 3 weeks down the road and they're past all their COVID testing and are not maintaining their daily monitoring, then they have to resubmit to another COVID test. And drivers from the U.S. or Canadian drivers that cross the U.S. for specialized loads will not be permitted up the Winter Road. They are allowed to come into the territories, drop their loads, and then drive back, but they won't be allowed to go past the Yellowknife point for our operational purposes. We're working very closely with our carriers to confirm and ensure they're meeting all the government requirements for long-haul drivers. And additionally, most of the carriers, all 4 of the major carriers that we are working with, have basically begun to separate their northern and southern drivers. So the folks that are going to assign to run to the Winter Road stay in their own version of a carrier northern bubble, and the drivers that come from the south to bring up supplies, they don't send them up the road. They recycle them, keep them separated, and then send them back down. So there's very little interaction between those 2 particular types of groups. I'm not sure. I'll just check with Mr. Norn if Dr. Conrad has anything to add on how we are screening or managing the drivers from a medical COVID perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Loing. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Conrad?
Thank you, Mr. Norn. No, I think Mike has gone over it quite well, and for the sake of time, I don't think there's really any important points to elaborate upon.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Dr. Conrad. Continue on, Mr. Loing.
Thank you, Mr. Norn. Just a couple slides left, folks. So I think one of the biggest things that, of course, as we all are concerned in the Northwest Territories, is if we develop a COVID-19 case. And in this particular situation, we have a very defined plan. And so with all 3 of our sites located up the Winter Road, if somebody develops any sign or symptom, that's it. They go see the medic, a mask is put on, and whether it's a cold or influenza or COVID-19, you can't tell the difference. We're asking the people on the road not to try and attempt that difference. They're required to phone Dr. Conrad and or Dr. Withers, who's ever on call, and those 2 physicians will oversee the medical direction of how we're going to manage those cases and how we liaise with the CPHO. And actually, Mr. Norn, I'll turn that over to Dr. Conrad to talk about how that screening and medical process would be driven. It's not driven by the joint venture; it's actually driven by our medical directors.
Thank you, Mr. Loing. Dr. Conrad.
Thank you again, Mr. Norn. Yes, and as Mike already pointed out, it's actually can be very difficult to distinguish on a clinical basis whether a person has COVID or not. In many cases, virtually impossible. So it's a very, very low threshold to initiate, say, our medical protocol for it, which would be prompt isolation of the individual and prompt testing. The subsequent steps are developed on a case-by-case basis. The medical management, of course, would follow according to the clinical severity of the case. But very, very early on, there'd be liaison with the CPHO and a treatment evacuation plan as well as an isolation plan would be put into place so that once the person comes out of their from the Winter Road, their medical needs are met, of course, but also so is the safety of the residents of the Northwest Territories. And quickly, another final piece would be very early close contact identification and getting those people also into self-isolation or quarantine. Despite all of the best efforts, this tricky virus, does show up, and so I don't think success is necessarily measured on getting 0 cases. I think that it wouldn't be unrealistic to expect that a case may appear, but the measure of success, I think, is how one is able to contain that and make sure that it stays to just that index case without any other spread around it. And so very, very early and proactive isolation of close contacts.
Thank you, Dr. Conrad and Mr. Loy.
Thank you, Mr. Norn. And the final slide, if we could go to slide number 16, which titled Additional COVID-19 Controls. And I think this is what I call the common sense slide. And as you can see here, we have implemented a mandatory education program for everybody working in the camps around physical distancing and approved facial barriers. And this also includes our drivers that actually have to take a mandatory online training program, which includes COVID-19 controls, even before they can drive on the Winter Road. Much like our drivers, our camp residents are being monitored daily for their temperature check and a COVID sign and symptom evaluation by medical personnel. And we've introduced and just started this week a comprehensive auditing program of compliance to our facilities through our joint venture health, safety, and environment team. So we want to ensure that what we say we are doing, and we are doing, and the only way to do that is by an active audit program. Mr. Norn, that sort of concludes the presentation that Dr. Conrad and I have for you on the Winter Road and our COVID controls, and we are open for any questions.
Yeah, Masicho, Mr. Loy and Dr. Conrad for that, for your presentation. With that, I'll turn this over to committee. Are there any questions or comments from committee to Mr. Loy or Dr. Conrad? We'll start off with Emily Knockleby.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say first off, congratulations on opening the road. The very first thing I ever stamped as a professional engineer was a Tibbitt to Contwoyto Winter Road load chart for the ice engineering company, so I have a special place in my heart for the ice road. My question is about, I'm actually really pleased with everything I see here. Knowing where the joint venture maybe started from when I worked on it to where it is at now, I think this is really a great improvement in a very short time, actually. My question is around when the truckers or the transport workers are showing up into the Northwest Territories from the south, before they report to you at the dispatch to be screened, etc. What is the joint venture doing to ensure that they're not then mingling or in Yellowknife or other places interacting with NWT residents prior to all of this screening taking place? I do understand you're asking them questions before they head up, but are they actually having a test down in Edmonton or in Alberta somewhere? And yeah, is there a method in place to prevent them from interacting with us until they are sort of shown to be COVID-free? Thank you.
Masicho, Emily Knockleby, Dr. Conrad or Mr. Loy, who would like to take that?
I think, thank you, Mr. Norn. I think I'll answer that question. And thank you for the acknowledgement of our progression on the Winter Road. So with the drivers, and it's a very interesting, with the carriers, it's very interesting because the carriers, the journey on the Winter Road with the drivers and the carriers doesn't really start till they check into our dispatch system and then check off the Winter Road. But we've extended ourselves out to meeting with the carriers to ensure. One of the biggest tools that we've had is the government requirements for the long-haul truckers, which is registration with Protect NWT for stays in the Northwest Territories over 36 hours. You can appreciate with over almost 500 drivers currently registered on our system, not all 500 are in the Territories right now, by the way, because we sort of slowly ramp up. With 500 drivers in the system, it's very hard for us to monitor those drivers. So, from the perspective, we work with the carriers so that they work with their drivers, and then ultimately getting them to work as fast as we can and putting them into our system and getting them up the road really limits their contact time in the Northwest Territories. I'll be honest with you, the drivers aren't here to spend time in Yellowknife. They're here to hit that winter road or chomping it at the truck tires to get up there. So one of the things that we've been working with the COVID Secretariat is to begin comprehensive review as the drivers come in. We're actually working it up this week. They've given us a week to get started. They'll be coming in and we'll be doing joint auditing. They'll take a look at our drivers that are in our system so they can compare them to the ones that have registered with Protect NWT to make sure that those isolation plans are there. They will be doing spot checks with us and throughout with all the carriers. So we've had there'll be about four meetings in total with the COVID Secretariat about how we're going to work together. So mostly auditing to ensure compliance to the government regulations because those requirements are very strong. Mr. Norn.
Thank you, Mr. Loing. Supplementary, Emily on Alchemy? Okay, nothing there. Nothing else. Do any other members have any questions? Emily Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also congratulations on opening the ice road, and I thank you for this presentation and the plan. I've had a number of constituents reach out with concerns, but I do think that the work both you and Protect NWT has done sets out a number of safety concerns. I was just hoping you could speak briefly to perhaps unrelated to COVID is any of the traffic calming measures you have done on the Ingham Trail. I know there's been complaints in past years about drivers going too fast and back-to-back trucks, and I believe the joint venture has put their mind to this. But if you could just speak to some of the mitigation measures regarding that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Emily Johnson. Mr. Loing.
Very good question, and I'm a lifelong resident of the Northwest Territories, and I've always and lived in the Northwest Slave for quite a while, and always get concerned about the truck traffic myself. So what we do on the Ingham Trail is first off we cap the speed. So there's been some speed changes as the Department of Infrastructure has allowed. We've kept our speeds down, so they remain at 70 kilometers an hour. The trucks are dispatched not right now because we don't have the COVID testing slowed the volume down, but at its peak we'll have 4 trucks every 20 minutes. And when they're traveling down the Ingham Trail, in addition to their speed, they're led by an experienced convoy leader that coaches the newer drivers. But they must maintain 1,000 meters separation while traveling on the Ingham Trail to avoid bunching or causing a lot of inconvenience to the folks that live and drive down there. We also have put in 2 blackout periods for the drivers. So from 7 in the morning to 8 in the morning, we stop dispatching trucks down the Winter Road. And from 5 to 6 in the evening, every day, 7 days a week. This allows people that are coming and working to drive in and not have to face the truck traffic, the challenges that may present to them. The other thing that we do is 24 hours a day, we operate 2 security services vehicles. These aren't for the public. These are for the Winter. I will call it the police for the drivers, even though they're our law enforcement on the road. And 24 hours a day, we have 2 security officers driving up and down the Ingham Trail. They are equipped with a radar gun. They are monitoring for unsafe behavior, crowding of center lines, speeding, seatbelt use, unsafe behavior, aggressive behavior. And these officers have the ability then to, we don't fine drivers, we punish them. And it sounds really draconian, but if a driver doesn't follow the rules, so we meter it out in days of suspensions. And there's a rule in the handbook that goes by that. And they can have a 1, 3, 5-day suspension, a season ban, or a permanent ban, depending upon the severity of what they have. So we're fairly aggressive on the folks that drive on the Ingham Trail in terms of the drivers, and we work very closely with the Ingham Trail. We just recently put out a notice to them to keep them fully informed of how we're managing traffic on the trail, because it remains a concern to them, it's a concern to us. Mr. Norn.
Thank you. Mr. MLA Johnson has no further questions. I'm just looking over. Do any of the members online or call-ins have any questions? MLA Cleveland, line's yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norn. So just to follow up in regards to MLA Knockelby's question, rules in Yellowknife and such, I have had some constituents reach out just about concern about ice road truckers that are in town fueling up, or that are not fueling up, sorry, but getting supplies and stuff, like we have Walmart and whatnot, and potential for people not following the rules. And I think that there's a twofold thing happening there, where on one side, there's kind of a need for public education in town, but then on the other hand, I'm wondering what kind of education is happening with drivers about the rules as far as operating within Yellowknife and staying compliant with the COVID restrictions here in town. And is that, I know you talked about not issuing fines, but doing kind of more of a punishment for people who don't follow rules of the road. Are those also being handed out, or a potential to hand those out to people who don't follow COVID regulations? Thank you.
Mr. MLA Cleveland, Mr. Lowy.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question, and it always comes down to where does the jurisdiction of the ice road end, start and stop, and we've and I guess in the case of once the drivers come to the territories, we don't actually know they're here, and that's the challenge we face until they come into our system. They're registered, and they come and get their what we call their truck number, and something very unique to any time that you see a heavy transport truck driving down the road, and it has a license plate, for a funny colored territorial license plate in its driver's window in the either upper left or lower right, upper left or lower left corner. You know that that's a Winter Road vehicle. It's very easy to distinguish, and it helps you to identify that vehicle. So until they check in with us, we very rarely know that we just don't have the contact, other than working with the carriers to remind them that they have to follow the government requirements. My thoughts are that if you find a person that's in a parking lot, you can always phone the carrier and speak with their health and safety team to determine maybe this is a carrier that's coming up that's working for any number of businesses in town, or doing regular hauling. I'm not sure. They could be a trucker based in the NWT. Sometimes you can't tell the difference. But once they have that ID plate, then they're very trackable to us, and you can phone our health, safety, and environment supervisor, and we'll begin an investigation if we believe there's a COVID infraction, understanding that we can't give out any sort of punishment for that because they're not on the Winter Road. They're in a legally binding government jurisdiction. But we would certainly go and take that to Protect NWT and the COVID Secretariat to pursue an investigation and to validate that if there's non-compliance, then if there is, we will ban that person from the road.
Thank you, Mr. Lowing. Supplementary, Emily Cleveland?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just switching directions here, Mr. Chair. I have a number of constituents who use the Winter Road actually for hunting purposes, to be able to access traditional hunting grounds. And so some of the concerns and questions have been around the gate that's used to close the road for safety purposes. And so I'm wondering if there is a potential to get some more information about when the gate is closed or when it is open, and if a constituent wants to be able to access the road but the gate is closed, what the best course of action is. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Cleveland. Mr. Loy.
So the gate is generally kept locked until we can ensure that the road is actually safe for public travel. And in the past, traditionally, the Winter Road has opened the road during construction, which I'll be the first to admit is probably not the best way to ensure public safety, and because you have portages that are unsafe, roads that are being built, equipment moving around. And once we get to a point where the road is deemed safe for the public travel, that's determined by our contractor to say, I feel comfortable, my family can drive on it, then we open it up to the public. This year, the gate was kept locked for quite a period of time, and I'll be the first to admit a lot of that had to do with the extremely poor ice conditions. So there was not the normal access to the Winter Road. That was just based on the long delays in building the road and some of the environmental conditions we faced. But once the road is open, we open it, and the only time we will close it is when we feel there's an imminent threat to the public. For example, there's a very dangerous storm coming in, and we've shut down the road. We're pulling people into camps. We would consider locking the gate, but it's very difficult for us because we don't want to lock people on the other side of the gate. So it's a last resort, and we have a public education sign to warn the public of winter storms so they don't drive into an unsafe situation. Often we're better prepared, and we find sometimes the public goes up not knowing the conditions they're about to face. But as usual, we always try to find a better way to address public safety without restricting access and understanding that as long as the road is safe for public travel, we cannot lock the gate, and under our license of occupation, we have to make it accessible to the public while ensuring public safety. I hope I've answered that question, Mr. Norn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Loing. Up next, I have Emily O'Reilly. Emily O'Reilly, line's yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I think I heard some discussion of auditing. It looks like the joint venture does its own, and maybe WSCC or COVID Secretariat does some. Maybe I can get some further details on this auditing and whether the results are shared back and forth and what that really means. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Mr. Loing.
Yes, and we're always open. Last year, we undertook a tour of the Winter Road with the Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission to ensure that all of our facilities meet requirements under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The COVID Secretariat is a new entity that we are working with, but I look forward to the joint auditing programs. So far the COVID Secretariat has indicated they will start their auditing and when need interact with us, other than the ones that we've asked to do joint ones with. So I will certainly look forward to sharing results in a confidential way. But yes, our documents can be made available to any regulator. Full transparency.
Thank you, Mr. Loing. Supplementary, Emily O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So maybe I can just get a little bit more detail about what the auditing is really going to be looking at. Is it to make sure that all of the people operating on the road have been properly screened and tested? I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of safety stuff going on, which is great, but I guess I'm interested in what specifically is going to be audited in terms of COVID-related compliance. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Mr. Loing.
No, excellent question. And as we move forward, the auditing programs that we're just wrapping up this week, because our joint venture health and safety teams are now in the camps, are to begin to look at fundamentally, and I'll be upfront and honest, compliance to the basically facial barriers and the physical distancing requirements. If we're going to protect people from COVID, testing is a great thing, but if we're going to prevent COVID from spreading, those two controls by far the strongest. We've started in our camps with these programs, and already a mixed bag of results. I'll be honest with you. When people work in a remote camp, they're very social in that you work with people for long days on end in a very small environment. You tend to the physical distancing decreases. One day it's 2 meters, the next thing it's 1.5, now down to 1.3. So that's the first auditing underway. At the end of this week, we'll be auditing training records to ensure compliance. And that's meeting actually a WSCC requirement on training. The next step will be for us to begin to audit the drivers as they come in to ensure compliance, that they are registered with Protect on WT. And as we go through, that's the sort of the three major that we've got started within the next 2 weeks. So for us to get started on that and get grounded and figure out where our successes are. And most importantly, we don't want to audit them to death. We want to audit, find where the improvements are, make the changes, and then re-audit again. So already we've, for example, the auditing that we found in one of our camps found facial barrier use and physical distancing to be weak at best, I'll be honest. So we addressed that by putting in a mandatory mask policy. Regardless of physical distancing, it doesn't matter. Whenever you walk into any one of our remote camps, you must wear an approved surgical mask, not your own personal one, but one that we give you. And now it's mandatory. So that's an example of where we found a deficiency through auditing, and now we're making a change, and now within a week we'll go back and re-audit compliance. Mr. Norn.
Thank you, Mr. Loing. Do I have any other questions from the members calling in? Okay, I don't hear any. I did have a couple of questions. Turning to slide 11, there is some mention about the PCR test, and I guess just for the benefit of our viewers too as well. Can you just, my question is, what is the turnaround time from when a driver is tested to getting a result for that PCR test?
Mr. Chair, I'll answer that question then. So what we're doing on the Winter Road, because of the complexity, most of our testing is people flying in. We test them and we have a few hours to sort through them before they fly out. The drivers are a bit of a different situation. Unfortunately, we have limited testing ability, meaning that we can process in its current configuration with the private sector provider that's how we're doing the testing for us. This company can only do 15 tests every 2.5 hours. So what we've done is we've changed our testing, our dispatch timeframes. Right now it's 4 trucks every hour, and we're getting to see how well the testing company can keep up with it. Then we'll move it to 4 trucks every 40 minutes, and then hopefully on our regular schedule, 4 trucks every 20 minutes. The drivers are allowed to proceed after being medically screened and tested. They're pretty well confined to their trucks on the next 8 hours that they travel up the Winter Road. And during that time frame, it gives our testing facility to deal with the large volume of tests. And the results could take anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5 hours, maybe 6 at the top. And 6 is the real. Not when I say worst case, that's the longest it could be. By that point, after an 8-hour journey, 8 to 9 hour, depending upon if they've had any issues, they'll arrive at our Lockhart operations, which is a closed facility. It's at that point that if a driver is found to have been tested positive, they will be, it's a mandatory that they have to stop at Lockhart. There's no way by which they can bypass it. The driver will pull in, they'll be met by a team, and the driver will be stood down discreetly. We don't get on a radio and say this. We'll talk to the driver. They'll, what we call dolly off the load, remove their trailer that they're hauling. There'll be a medical assessment to determine that the driver is fit. Generally, as a rule, if they've made it that far, they're either asymptomatic or may have mild symptoms because they've already passed a medical screening. Then the driver will self-extract or drive back to Yellowknife under escort. We'll bring them back. Of course, at that point, we have a quick phone call through, or immediate phone call through to Dr. Conrad and Dr. Withers to discuss the management plan for the driver. And then we work with the carrier, with the CPHO, then to ensure that that driver goes into quarantine, and then the management plan is developed. Mr. Norton.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And I just had one, not so much a question, more of a comment. I think it's, I think your team is doing a great job with the Aboriginal business and the Northern business, and I want to commend you folks for that. And I'd like to turn over the line over to the Premier shortly, see if she has any comments. But I just want to, thank you for everything, and I wish you all the best this Winter Road season.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So with that, and I don't hear any of the questions from committee, does Madam Premier, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mr. Lowing and Dr. Conrad for coming today. Everyone knows around the table that the mining industry is a huge part of our GDP in the Northwest Territories. I want to congratulate all of you for working with our CPHO. We, on our side, the GNWT, we recognize that we want to keep our mines open. There's a huge amount of people that in the Northwest Territories that are employed with that. And I really congratulate the mines, Mr. Chair, for being willing to work with us and the measures that they have in place, including joint ventures. It's important, and they are doing their part as corporate citizens. And I, again, want to say thank you for the work. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mashisho, Madam Premier. And so with that, this concludes the public portion of our meeting. Committee will now move in camera for a quick wrap-up discussion. And again, thank you for everybody joining in with us. And do I have a motion to go in camera? Emily Knuckleby. So we'll just take a short 2-minute break, and we'll continue on with the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Long.